Yeah, so we're talking about tools for goal setting from a strategic planning, DEIJ lens, and more for effective planning, visioning, communication, all of your needs as an organization. And we're going to try and cover a lot in a very short period of time. So if I'm moving a bit fast, it's okay to ask me to slow down. But I also want to say that this is the kind of workshop that can be done in a full day or several days or even weeks or months, depending on how you're approaching it. And we're going to try and do it all in about 30 minutes. And I would consider it more of an appetizer than a full workshop if I were you, and sort of how you're trying to digest it. I'm just going through the presentation right now, and what you'll see is a little bit about my background, some brief highlights from my background there. I'm not sure if everyone had an opportunity to look at, say, my bio or anything like that, anything you received so far. But just to be really quick, I've run about 7 or more organizations in my career, is either executive director or president. Many of them are turnarounds. I'm talking about challenging situations where they're about to go out of business or lose their funding. Or I remember one situation where there were already locks on the door for failure to pay back taxes to the state for employee taxes the day I arrived on my first day. So I've been in I've run into a few burning buildings, like I like to say. And so, what I'm speaking from is a bit of experience about like taking organizations, working organizations that were really at the brink and helping them turn around and being in a better financial position or with their community or with their board or anything like that. So and you'll see a few other things there because I have a few diverse interests. Diving into his objectives are sort of overview the process of planning, some internal assessment options, scoping key questions for your plan or goals to address, best practices for developing good questions or good outcomes, drafting your plan or planning to plan and setting goals, and of course, some room for questions at the end. This workshop focuses on goal setting and how to rethink the process of planning so the results are plain or goals that furthers your group in a scientific way or a DEIJ way, and adding a little science there, a little outcomes, some key performance indicators, DEIJ, diversity, equity, and inclusion, including justice, which I know a lot of environmental groups are looking at. And DEIJ can be a very polarizing term or phrase, and some folks will approach it differently, whether it's DEIJ or DEIB, diversity, equity, inclusion, and belonging, or diversity, equity, inclusion, and sacredness. These are all sort of phrases that different groups are using and approaching right now as they're trying to apply that framework to their work. We want to talk about just the competence of all of those things and a step-by-step process or some things you can do that would be best practices for you if you're going to roll this out for your organization. Your organization, I'm here for the illustration of this presentation. We're talking about a plane, we're talking about a boat, we're talking about some kind of form of travel, getting from here to there. In the real world, it's going to be your organization, it's going to be your not-for-profit, it's going to be the work you're doing with your watershed group. And there's a lot of questions about this, like, how do we get off the ground? What's going to give us the power to move? Where are we going? How do we steer this thing? And this illustration might be meaningful to some of you, might resonate, how you might be feeling right now. And if you are, don't feel bad. A lot of us feel this way or have been here at some point in time. Hopefully the tools we cover today will help you sort of figure out the best way to start getting control of that machinery, of that organization, of that plane, of that ship or that boat, and getting it going in the direction that you want and landing it safely at the end. The first thing I want to talk about is just if you're going to engage in planning, and this is really important for a lot of folks, is like just knowing your why you're doing this. Setting goals or creating a plan. If you're responding to someone else, you're just trying to do a checklist, and you're just trying to sort of get in there because you feel it's the right thing to do, and you don't have a real sort of sense of why you're doing it, or someone's telling you to do it. It may be more harmful than helpful to your organization. And so some questions you may ask yourself are, are you creating a plan because you were told to do so? If you were, why were you told to do so? And some people have been there, where the board is saying that, or they believe a funder is saying that, or government agencies asking for that, or the community is asking for that. And they're like, well, we're going to do it because people want to see this, but they're not even sure why they're doing it. So get to know that. Do you have a question that you're asking or trying to ask about your future or answer about your future or who you are in this community? Has your focus changed? That could be another reason why, where you were working in one direction and working in, with all your resources heading one direction, and now you want to go in another direction because of the landscape and how you're reading it and how you're seeing it. So knowing your why and why you're doing this can be really, really helpful and important for how you move forward. And then besides the why is the what. What are your expected outcomes if you create a plan? Maybe you have a plan already and you want to update the plan because it's a little outdated. The last time the plan was developed, you might have been 10 years ago or even longer, or you've never done one. You're a young group and you feel you've turned a particular corner and you want to think about like what's going to happen in the future for us. And if you do develop a plan, what do you plan to do with that plan? How will it be used by your organization to achieve its goals and its efforts going forward? You may even ask yourself, who are you trying to engage? Are you trying to engage your community a bit more? Are you trying to engage a certain part of your community a bit more? Are you trying to engage funders? Are you trying to attract funders? Are you trying to convince government agencies or others to get behind you, raise your own profile? Those kind of questions are going to be there for you to sort of address and visit and think about if you're going to engage in a plan. If you're planning, you're going to do some goal setting. And so here are some suggested reasons why and how you might go about that. So some potential goals of goal setting and creating a plan are: you wish to ensure the internal capacity addresses the ways internal practice need to shift or be upheld to support agreed upon goals, like a scientific goal or a DEIJ goals we were talking about. These principles may specify around power dynamics or policies or values and decision-making structures. These are all things you may find yourself visiting as you're thinking about sort of goal setting around this plan, and what you're trying to get to in the end. And you don't want to stop at just the pretty words. You don't just want to talk about, like, we wrote a beautiful plan, it's wonderful, everyone reads it, looks good, it's full of all these good intentions. You may want to create a plan that, that has some, at the back end, some implementation on the end. And I'm a huge believer, and I've run into my fair share of people who said, well, I don't believe in these planning processes. I don't believe in sort of long-range planning, strategic planning. I've never seen those things work out. And one huge reason why is because a good majority of plans, once they're said and done, end up in someone's desk drawer, in someone's file cabinet, and they're never, ever executed on. And one of the reasons why they don't get executed on is because folks do the planning, do the visioning, have this nice, pretty sort of presentation they want to make, but they never transition to how are we going to implement the plan? What's going to be the action plan we're going to take after the plan? We have this big picture, but how have we broken this down into little steps that are going to help us think for the next year, 2 years, 4 years or more, how we're going to execute and actually deliver on some of the goals that were in the big, beautiful plan that we created. Do you wish to establish standards or principles or a common understanding around, say, something like DEIJ or other work you want to do across your organization, across your programs, in your initiatives, in your community, that everyone can see what you stand for as an organization? These are other goals you can have for getting involved in developing a plan. You wish to implement a training plan based on your findings. After you've done all this work and after you've done all this research and you've had focus groups and you've vetted your entire community, you might discover that there is a true weakness or a need that your community has, and you might want a plan that's going to say, well, we're going to do a training plan that's going to help us move our community in a certain direction or our population in a certain direction with increased or enhanced skills. And if you wish to do something like integrate more scientific or DEIJ principles and practices into your culture for your organization, you might do a plan to figure out, well, how are we going to do that? That's a lot of work. It's a lot of intense focus on, say, the scientific things you want to include or DEIJ things you want to include, and rolling it out in a way that's kind of authentic, if I can say that, on either side of the equation. I'm looking in the chat as I'm talking as well. Thank you for that, Laura. It's helpful. And so getting started, we're here now. We're talking about getting started and how are we going to move this stuff forward, and some key questions you can sort of ask yourself about getting started. How have our core strengths and challenges and those of other government agencies or not-for-profit organizations changed in the last few years? A lot has changed in the landscape, especially if you're talking about what's happened during the pandemic or just before the pandemic. The world is moving very rapidly. And I'll pause here to say this. There was a time, and I've actually been in the industry long enough and been doing this work long enough to remember years ago when you did a plan like this, and you might have been looking at 5-year horizons, 10-year horizons, or even more. Where you're like, well, 10 years from now, we see ourselves doing this. 20 years from now, we see ourselves doing this. The thing is that the world has been truncated because of so many of the events that have been happening, especially if you go back, not just the pandemic, but let's go back to 2008, when the last huge financial crisis happened, and many not-for-profits and a lot of businesses couldn't predict the world long range anymore. And your plans became much shorter. The idea of a plan that's more than 5 years is a pretty brave move, a pretty bold move. I would personally advise against it. Most plans right now are looking at being like 1 year to 3 years, no more than 5 years out, because the world is changing that fast. You may find yourself like, putting things on paper today saying, oh, well, 3 years from now, we're gonna be doing this. But then you have a pandemic and your entire foundation shifts, and you have to respond accordingly to that. And that's affected everyone in the world. So the average plan right now has kind of become, like a 1, 3, no more than 5-year plan. So the question you may ask yourself is, where's our watershed moving? And are these significant new directions to explore for us, really, given what we can tell, what we can envision about the landscape? And you want everyone in your organization, as many people as possible, the leadership, the board of directors, the staff, your leadership team, the community you're serving, you want their opinion and even some of your funders, because their input's going to, their worldview, where they're looking at things, because some people are seeing this at the proverbial 30,000-foot view. Others are seeing it at the balcony level. Others are seeing it at the dance floor level. I can use those kind of examples about how high, medium, and low people are in terms of like the hierarchy of the organization, and how they might be seeing things. And everyone from their particular vantage point has a different opinion or perspective about what the work looks like and how it might be moving forward. And you want to borrow and you want to hear from all of those different opinions when you're doing your plan. Are there initiatives that are no longer important or as pressing as they were? I think for a lot of us coming out of the pandemic, there are things that were probably important before 2020 that became less important for the organization, or got put on the back burner or on the sideline, and we had to move other things up because that's what the community was responding to, or what we needed to sort of do. And they might be more pressing right now, and you might see that showing up in your planning. How do we think about growing our assets or our building or capacity? Imagine buildings. Imagine 2019, everyone wanted to be in a bricks and mortar, sort of work, and we all were used to doing that sort of work. You fast forward, the world becomes so remote. I know a lot of organizations that simply left their bricks and mortars and don't have any intention of coming back and staying virtual as a staff or in their functioning for the near future, if not longer. How should our evolution toward becoming a justice-centered organization shift our organizational structure, our future direction? How is our shift towards being more scientifically focused shift our organization? It may or it may not. It may help improve the organization. It might mean different capacities or different additions that you're going to add on to make sure you can function that way. And what's the most pressing sort of inclusion, diversity, equity, and access opportunities we can create for the population you want to serve? And that's going to be different for every organization. They're going to answer that in different ways. And I'll pause here, and I work with a lot of groups that view diversity as maybe singularly a Black or white issue. I'm going to encourage everyone to expand their mind, expand their work and their work focus to look at diversity as being so much broader than that. It's race, it's gender, it's religion, it's faith, it's access for different populations. Besides I think what we see in the news a lot, where it gets boiled down to some of these very simple issues about, I can't say simple, but these issues that are more Black and white. And I want to encourage everyone to move past that, beyond that, including that, but more. And for your organization, for your group, based on your desired future direction, what resources, core capacities, expertise is needed to achieve your organizational priorities? What kind of people who are not here on your team? I remember going to an organization once that, had major financial decisions they were trying to make and need to make in front of them, and they had a history of making them fairly poorly. And then I realized that there was no one who had a financial background on the board of directors. So we purposely went after and started adding more folks who had financial acumen, strong financial acumen onto the board, which helped improve their capacity and the decision-making around financial issues, and they began to perform better. And they saw a huge turnaround from being in a deficit to being in a positive financially because of that extra advice. And for us, how do we define our success? And how do we intend to measure that success? And that's up to every organization, because you have related to your mission, related to your work, and how you're showing up in your communities. What is your success metric, and how are you going to measure that? And if you are successful and you feel you're being successful, how are you going to build on that? How are you going to continue to build on that each and every year? Are you going to have a plan or a vision that allows you to do that? Is there a community group that you want to work with, or groups you want to work with that can help you build that? So a little bit about just sort of adding a bit more science or a science lens to your planning. Are you moving as an organization or as a group from issue to choice, and not looking at just, well, we're focusing on this one singular issue or a few issues that you're working on, but being able to multiply your options and your opportunities to sort of focus on what choice you want to make about where you want to focus, how you want to focus your resource, your energy, and how impactful those choices can be in the community you're trying to serve or move. Are you generating more possibility for yourself, strategically speaking, as an organization? What are your desired outputs or key performance indicators, or KPIs? Are you able to be specific in your conditions for success? And what info do you need to inform you? And I think you might have already heard through some of the reports that there's a lot that's out there at your fingertips, and you don't have to be the scientific group yourself who's doing the research. There's a lot of reports that have been put out there. There's a lot of work that's being done by other agencies in the state, government agencies, that you can borrow from and you can reference to make your report work. I know that for many of the groups who are on this call, funding is a challenge. And so you may not have the ability or the capacity or the resource to do that kind of research right now. It's fairly expensive to get engaged with scientific work. However, there are a lot of groups who are willing to lend that information or put the reports out for public consumption that you can borrow from, especially in the watershed community, where you can use that to influence how you're going to work in your particular area. And what other additional information do you need to inform you in the work you're going to do, and educating yourselves and your community about what's needed in your watershed and how you intend to impact that? I'm going to move a little bit through DEIJ, and some helpful questions around how you might look to explore that. Are you inviting non-traditional partners into this process whenever possible? Those who are most affected, policymakers, partners, different groups, and how are you doing that? And how do you observe and review the findings from data you're gathering about the populations you're trying to serve and trying to meet, whether it's focus group related or it's survey related, and how you're going to visit that and also employ that in your action plan going forward, really having hardcore conversations amongst yourselves and with your constituency on engaging other groups in the process. How do you notice and explore where prevailing models and practices are being challenged by new information? And ever since George Floyd, especially, there's been a lot of movement around DEIJ work, more information, more practices, more tools, and staying current and staying ahead of that stuff might help you. And what I love about the work that's happening now is that those tools are being really vetted by different groups, and they are more helpful than they've ever been before. If you're a group that's trying to work around bringing more diversity, equity, inclusion, justice, belonging, sacredness into the work that you're doing. And how do you hold space? How do you make room for not just including people, but also letting go of outdated practices or ways that were not useful for you or the population you're trying to serve? And how do you make room for new ways to emerge, maybe through conversation or integration or working with different populations and learning more and discovering and feeling and realizing that, we can change or we can adopt some new methods that are really going to be helpful and impactful for how we move forward. And then how do you co-create? How do you invite folks into a conversation where there's co-creation and their voice can be heard and they can help be a part of the moving forward of the work that you want to do? And there's some innovative ways, and how do you then speak to the new information? And that's important. Not only just that you discovered it, but how do you then incorporate and speak to it? And so we've learned these new things. We want to incorporate this going forward. And there's nothing wrong with that because the entire world's moving forward in the best way possible. And you're trying to be a part of that as well. And that speaks to your organic process and your learning, your engaged, active learning process. And then I want to speak to some tools here. And there are many tools out there. I'm gonna, with the time that we have, I'm gonna just speak to a few of them. Backwards design, backwards planning, SMART goals, SWOT analysis, 3 of my favorite that I love to use when I'm engaging in these kind of planning processes, these strategic planning processes, however you want to describe them. And I've heard that there's going to be some more workshops that will have more time to go in great detail around this stuff. I'm just giving kind of this overview, as I said. But you're talking about backwards design, backwards planning. It's a tool that started out in education, used by educators to sort of plan their curriculum on how to teach. And could I share model? Yeah, I'm trying to go back to that, Martin. I'll try. And planning going backwards is, again, speaking again that 1 to 3 to 5 year process. Determine, as an organization or a project you're working on, what are the outcomes? What do you want to be? If you're talking about your watershed, the open question could be, what do you want to be? How do you see yourselves in the next 3 years, the next 5 years, or even as short as the next year? I tend to say you try to do a little longer than a year because the process to develop one of these plans takes some time. It can take anywhere from, say, 3 months to a full year or even longer, depending on the size of your organization, the scope of the project, to sort of work it and do the details of the plan and pull people together. Whether you're a full-time organization, you're a part-time organization, there are all these variables that are going to impact how long it takes to develop a plan. So I would hate to see you work for a year developing a plan that's only a year long, right? But knowing what you're pushing out there, well, let's say it's 3 years to 5 years, and you really do start planning backwards from that. And the more you can have conversations and visualize that future for your organization, the more detailed, the more vivid, the more action-oriented and plausible that plan becomes. And then benchmarking and working backwards, start thinking about, the intentionality and the more intentional you are, the more achievable that plan becomes. And again, I'm treating this as a sort of a teaser about backwards planning. But if you say at the end of the year, and this is what I love, I'm doing a short-term plan. It's like, we're here October. How are we defining our success? Well, if, it might be, June, it might be June 2023. By June 2023, we want to have X amount of dollars. We want to be able to impact our community this kind of way. We want to have this program and initiative launched, and we're going to plan backwards from June 2023 with all the benchmarks and details and key performance indicators on how we're going to achieve that goal. I want to move past backwards planning to a little bit more about SMART goals. I'm going to imagine some people if not heard the phrase, or familiar with SMART goals, where you are trying to, as an organization, set goals, and you set goals, but you haven't really been able to get there because maybe the plan was a little too vague. Maybe there wasn't enough detail to it. SMART goals are wonderful because they ask you to be as detailed as possible for your organization and frame those goals in a way that everyone, they're explicit and open and everyone can communicate. And I'll show you in the next slide a little bit. And some people might have seen this sort of stuff. This is a SMART goal applied to a person's life. I love the example because it really speaks to what SMART goals are about. But you can apply SMART goals to your organization, and that's where they most often show up. And SMART goals tend to be very specific. SMART goals also, besides being specific, and I would do each as a bullet, The goal for us is to launch our first fundraiser online, by fall 2022. Make it measurable that at this fundraiser, it's going to have X number of people, and the target's going to be X number of dollars. And we're going to do X amount of outreach to make sure it happens. and make sure that it's attainable. For many groups, doing their first fundraiser, their first online fundraiser, they haven't done it just thus far, a year from now is a reasonable timeline to work within, given the resources they have in front of them. And they have the resources, they have the personnel, and they have the community to reach out to be able to sort of launch such an event. For others, it might be really like way too ambitious, and they might have to dial it back. And that only comes from how well you know yourselves. And then it has to be relevant, right? How important would it be for us to establish our first fundraising event? How is it going to help our organization? How's it going to help our community? How's it going to help us achieve our goals? And many of you already probably can give some thought to that, and how that would work. I want to move on to talk SWOT analysis. SWOT analysis is a tool that's often tied to long-range visioning and planning itself, but it's also a great tool to use by itself or use in conjunction with other parts of this process. If I scroll back up, I love using all of these: the backwards planning, the SMART goals, and the SWOT analysis all together in the entire process. So in a SWOT analysis, and people may have seen this diagram before, I'm going to slide down. If you haven't, usually these 4 boxes where you're looking at the strengths, the weaknesses, the opportunities, and the threats that occur in your organization. And internally speaking, you're looking at what are the strengths of our organization internally. It might be the people, it might be the personnel, it might be our connections to our community. What are the weaknesses? Well, there might be some populations that could really be important. There might be some partners who might be really important who aren't a part of our team, or who are adversarial to us, or even in competition with us. But what are the outside things? What are some of the opportunities? Well, the opportunities might be that there are still so many populations and organizations out there who we haven't yet met us yet, who could be great partners and allies. And what are some of our threats? The threats might be there's a new group in town, a new environmental group who's a bit more popular for some reason, or raising their profile a little faster clip than we are for some reason, and they are taking some of our constituency away. They're taking some of our board members away. Who knows what those things might be? But when you're looking at this stuff and I'm going to go back up, and you're looking at your strengths, these things that are internal to your organization, your process, a project that you are in control of. These might be great things that you're doing, that you're making your name, you're making your way with, or it's been kind of what you've been known for a long period of time, and people are feeling like this is thing we can still hang our hat on, or you have some great brand new initiative that's kind of making waves, and you feel really good about that. Or weaknesses, these internal factors where you maybe process-wise, you guys, the follow-through might not be as good. You don't have as many people or the talented folks that you want to have in a particular area on your team or in your organization. I mentioned one best mentioned before, being a part of an organization that had a lot of financial decisions to make, which was kind of a good thing, but they didn't have the right people on talent-wise or capacity-wise in the organization to help them make those decisions. That was a big weakness for them, and being able to bring the right people on really helped them a lot. And then the opportunities, these external factors that an organization or process or project should or could develop, right? Things that you see in front of you, that you feel someone will say on the board or someone in the community will say, do you know this is happening? If you guys take advantage of this funding wise, you join this coalition or you're part of this initiative, you might make some more contacts, some more allies, and who knows where and get on the radar for some important funders, and who knows where it's going to go. And threats I mentioned before, those external factors to your organization. And sometimes I'll say there are some internal threats also, right? I'd say weakness-wise. And what you want to do ultimately when it comes to making a SWOT analysis work for you is you want to highlight and emphasize and take advantage of your strengths and your opportunities. And then you want to minimize your weaknesses and your threats. How might you do that? It's an operational question when you're doing a SWOT analysis. And a lot of times the SWOT analysis alone, once you've done the work, can itself help you think through about some of the goals you want to set for yourself going forward, and some of the tactical actions you're going to take to address those things. Some more examples here of what could be internal strengths and weaknesses. Your management, your governance, your culture, your systems, your staffing, your physical assets, your financial resources, your relationship with your community, your vendors and your donors, your reputation, and some external opportunities and threats. Legislation, legal issues, funding, social economic environment, competition, needs of stakeholders, something like the pandemic itself, COVID. All right, so now you've done all this soul searching, all this material work. Now what? Based on what you've uncovered, based on all your discovery, what core questions would you want a plan or a process to help you answer? What's the external problem that we're trying to solve as an organization? What's the gap between what you wished to have happen and what's actually happened? And then why is this the case? And how might you address it? How might you resolve it? How might you move it forward? How might you mitigate those circumstances? As I'm wrapping up a little bit here, some helpful hints as you get to sort of writing or drafting a plan. Don't get enamored or fall too in love with the colorful, graphically designed, presentations you might have seen or come across and say, oh, I can't do that. Just focus on the narrative first. Focus on the content. Focus on the writing. Focus on the other stuff, the graphics and the design and the presentation later on. If you don't have the resources, don't worry. It doesn't, being flashy and pretty isn't going to make a difference. It's really about the content, because folks who are interested in the audience you're trying to get will read it, and will read it for its authenticity and its content. Make use of your timelines. Like you think through, make use of a 12-month, 24-month timeline, and whether it's backwards planning or not, and how you're going to achieve the goals. Whether it's a monthly plan or a quarterly plan or an annual plan, figure out ways to make use of that timeline. Identify and using source material. Again, I mentioned earlier that there are reports out there that are being produced across the state that you can borrow from. And of course, as long as you attribute to them, you're going to be in a positive space in your communication, or even in a lot of cases asking, can you use this material for your report or reference it for your report? And collaborate. This is not a one-person thing. Putting together a plan is almost always a collaborative thing, a collaborative process. And you want to make sure that you involve your board, you want to involve your organizational leadership, you want to involve your community, you want to involve your staff and your board and your foundations who are funding you, or others who have a worldview that might be a little bit different, and inviting them to be part of the process. I've done these plans with as many as, the entire organization of a 2,000 person organization involved. And it's a small organization, it has 10 people involved, but always everyone found themselves involved and everyone found a way to input. And I was always amazed at how much I learned from every single constituency that was part of the organization. As I said earlier, the last thing I want to say is, once the plan is done, once it's been sort of written out and you have an idea where you want to go, you still have to operationalize it. You have to turn it into a tactical plan that helps you get things achieved. It shouldn't, and you have to do your best to make sure it's a living, breathing document. It shouldn't be the kind of thing that ends up in someone's desk or in a file cabinet, never to be looked at again. It may sound kind of corny, but once the plan is done and it's been made into a tactical plan, you're going to walk around with this in your hand. You're going to lead with the plan. You're going to always lead and open almost every conversation in your community or with your constituency around this plan that you have, and this tactical plan, and what you plan to do, and when is it going to happen, and how is it going to happen. And then for all of you, just in this presentation, I've given a couple of links for those who are going to download it. You can watch a few videos that speak to a lot of these things in a bit more detail. And I'll pause now for some Q&A, and I hope I'm on time. How did I do, Emily?
You did great. Thank you so much, Rodney.
Thank you.
Well, we're waiting for some questions to come in, and I know one already did come in. I'll just say that we heard in our watershed group needs assessment how important capacity is, how much of a challenge capacity is for our local watershed group partners, our nonprofit partners, our agencies. It just seems like, this is really a challenge across the board. And so we wanted to bring in this organizational planning in, and I think part of the great thing about Rodney's talk is that all of this applies to watershed scale planning planning too, both organizational and then, what are the threats to my watershed? What do I want to see? How can I do backwards planning? So really excited to see how everyone brings this information to your work. And we're seeing lots of positive feedback in the chat. So that's great. So there was a question about model measurements of success. Are there metrics for community input and involvement that planners or environmental scientists should be employing to measure the success of their outreach?
I can't speak as well as probably some of you on this call can about environmental work and that's how it's showing up for environmental groups. But I would imagine that for those key performance of its success around the watershed itself and how groups are doing that work and how they're showing results over time, that there are a number of reports that exist, especially from New York State. Because I know when my research was report, I read some of the styling without coming across as an expert. I read some of the styling that was employed there. And some of that was shared obviously from Emily to me to sort of get me on board with this stuff. Great work around sort of how goal setting is happening. The Hudson River Watershed has done some of that stuff. I think the Harlem River Watershed did a report maybe a year ago that I think is fabulous in communicating exactly how to marry KPIs to outcomes and track those things.
Great. We've got a question here, and that's going to be a great transition because we're going to hear from the Harlem River Watershed folks in a moment. But do you have any suggestions on how to make collaboration happen in places where it has not happened previously?
Yeah, the suggestions I would offer is focus groups are a way to get information. I personally am a huge fan of inviting folks to a conversation about just the SWOT for your community. What are the strengths, weaknesses, opportunities, and threats that you see for the community that you're trying to serve, especially in regard to the watershed? And you want a few voices there. And in those sessions, you might find yourself not just talking about those SWOT analysis, but also even do some visiting conversations around how, if we address these things might be different. And getting all that feedback that you're going to receive and have everyone's voice being in the room and just asking them to sort of lend their voice to the conversation. Folks, I find, tend to really be appreciative of being invited to the conversation, lending their vantage point, and talking from their unique perspective about what's going on. And from there, at the very end, always asking folks, if we continue this, and we do plan to continue these conversations, can we count on you? Can we invite you to further conversation or maybe even some collaboration around some of this work? And you'll be surprised, I think, in how many folks are yes, and who want to be helpful in one way or another to accomplishing this. In my career, I can say I've probably worked on no fewer than 15 or 20 of these kinds of plans. Yeah, I'm that old. And opening the conversation up to folks on being involved and being engaged and collaborating, you'd be surprised at what kind of response you get.